Welcome to the DMZ, a place to practice good faith rhetoric, not just farm gotchas and dunks. We use structure to cultivate conversations where you have to stop and listen to the other person, even if it is just to find the flaws in what they are saying. Please check your weapons at the door, take notes, and attack the belief, not the believer. After each debate, there will be a free link to where you can go to vote on which side you believe made the most compelling case. So, sit back, relax, and cast those votes. This is the DMZ. All right, so the way this goes, everybody who's not been here before, there's going to be 3-minute sections going back and forth. Starting with the affirmative, the captain will choose a debater to go first with an opening. Then the opposite team will choose another debater on their team to cross-examine or rebut the first debater. Then they are going to go do their opening themselves, and then the other team will choose somebody to cross-examine, rebut, and back and forth until everybody has gone. Now, in the course of that, every single debater will have debated two of the people on the other side of the fence. The final round, or the main area of this is going to be the championship rounds, where every two debaters who have not faced each other yet will now get locked in the middle for 10 minutes apiece, and they will go back and forth in an open forum format. After that, each of the debaters will also get 3-minute closes in the same order that they went earlier. And during that, we're going to ask you guys to go ahead and send in and submit any questions. Now, hopefully I'm going to have some questions myself, but I'm really going to rely on you guys. We don't have judges around for these anymore. So I'm hoping that you guys will have some questions for them or some ideas or some points. In which case you throw a couple bucks in the tip jar and we'll throw the questions to them while you guys are doing your votes at the end. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and kick this off. First things first, Mr. TesticleJohnson's, who is going to be the first debater on the affirmative team?
So the first champion that we have chosen is Grufus.
Grufus. All right, Grufus, if you, sir, would be so kind, 3 minutes is going to go on the clock. Uninterrupted opening. I'll start the clock when you start to talk.
What I want to talk about tonight and what I care about tonight is human flourishing, not wages and not convenience. The deeper question of whether a society is structured in a way that lets people live well. And tipping culture survives by manipulation. It blurs the line between compensation and gratitude, between obligation and voluntarism, between a price and a gift. And it depends on most people never noticing the blur is happening to them. By flourishing, I don't just mean happiness. I mean the development and exercise of the virtues that make a life go well. And one condition for that is being able to trust that things are what they are presented as. A gift that's actually an obligation. A price that's actually a guilt tax. That's not a quirky cultural habit. That's manipulation dressed up as etiquette. And by manipulation, I mean a system that depends on people responding to expectations that function as obligations while being described as voluntary. When was the last time you tipped less than 18 to 20% and actually felt like you had a choice? Most people a long time ago, and that's this system working as designed. Tipping calls itself gratitude. For most people, it's a guilt tax. You're not being asked to give, you're being manipulated into paying and being called generous for it. And a person manipulated into giving isn't practicing generosity. They are just complying. The same manipulation runs the other way. Tipping tells the worker the same story. Work hard and you'll be rewarded. But tip totals are shared by things that have nothing to do with the quality of work. The worker is sold the same lie the customer is sold, that it is merit. It isn't. It's a system that's stopped being honest about what it is, what it measures, and whether the worker absorbs that dishonesty every shift, unable to plan, unable to rely on their own competence. No one designed this necessarily maliciously, but a manipulation doesn't need a mastermind to still be one. It needs people on both ends to stop noticing. My opponents may talk about incentives and wages tonight, but I'm here to talk about something more basic. Whether a flourishing society should let a wage disguise itself as a gift and call it a transaction. I don't believe it should. I yield the rest of my time.
All right. And Lethe, who is going to cross-examine Grufus?
It's gonna be me.
All right. Give me
Hey,
one
Lethe.
second here. Boom. All right. 3 minutes is going to go on the clock now for you. You know how to use this time. Cross-examine, poke holes, set up arguments. I'll start the clock when you start to talk, sir.
So, Grufus, I need to know who has the yacht pointed at your head telling you that you have to tip 18%.
Sorry, well, no, who has the what pointed at your head?
The yacht, the gat, the blick.
Oh, okay. No one's actually like physically coercing you, right? No one's actually physically coercing you, but that's not really the point we on the app are making here today.
So you're telling me that we don't have the personal agency to not tip. Is that what you're telling me?
No, we have the personal agency to not tip. The difference, however, is you have some sort of social institution, social function, right? That moves it from an individual choice to a choice that is essentially made collectively for you instead.
So how is it the responsibility of the end user for a system they have no control over to try and buck a system they could not even change with a general strike?
You can. Sorry, what was the first part of that question? I got the general.
How is it the
strike.
responsibility of the end user for a system when they have no control to try and buck a system they couldn't even begin to change with a strike?
Because it's much like in the way to bring up that one turtle analogy, you should send that turtle back into the sea, even if there's thousands of turtles. You're still making a difference within it and still having positive influence on society, even if you're not going to totally change that society.
Hmm. And then you bring up human flourishing, but yet you don't want one of those turtles, even if they're exceptional, to be able to gain the benefit of the exceptional things that they do. Why is this?
I'm sorry, I'm saying you should be the one going. Am I misunderstanding the question? I'm saying you should be sending that turtle back into the sea. To increase its flourishing, to help its flourishing.
Yeah, but you're withholding aid from said turtle that is diminishing its flourishing. You just drain the well. Why would you do this?
I'm not diminishing. How am I reducing its flourishing by making sure it survives?
You're making sure it survives by giving it what it deserves for the exceptional service it provided.
I don't think that's analogous. You're comparing effectively manipulating you into paying someone else's wages.
Wow. And you think that society itself is going to make up for that?
Whether or not I don't think that's also really translatable. You're trying to say you're trying to get the conversation outside, I think, of the prompt.
All right.
We'll see.
With that, we're going to go ahead and go over to you now, Lethe. 3 minutes going on the clock for your opening. Tell us more about the turtles, sir.
All right. Let's start the party by saying there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. Tip your fucking waiter. A recent survey of nearly 12,000 adults by the Pew Research Center showed that 72% of Americans feel they are being asked to tip in more places than they were 5 years ago, and consumers are largely unimpressed by the practice. A similar survey by Bankrate found 2/3 of Americans think negatively of the tipping system, with 30% saying it's out of control. There are some leftover effects from the pandemic, during which many workers and businesses relied on tips to survive, which I don't see why you wouldn't want to help them survive, but, for the sake of the argument. People became very generous during COVID. An attorney and hospitality law professor at the University of Houston said that during COVID, more places expanded the tipping model, and that trend has continued post-COVID. But just because you're prompted to tip doesn't mean that you have to tip. If you don't feel the service deserved a tip, then you don't tip. Or in the instance you feel service was terrible, you can give the ultimate review of 1 penny. We have agency in how we respond to perceived social pressures. We are not chained by what a kiosk or a point of sale system proposes to us. In the US, tipping got its start in the civil and post-Civil War and Reconstruction period, when employers were hiring people of color and not paying them wages. Would you not want for these Black people that were doing exceptional service or just trying to live to not have a living wage or not be compensated for what they do? Back then, this practice happened primarily in the railroad industry. It was essentially an extension of slavery. Several factors may have converged to spawn this tipping evolution. The advent of digital payment systems has made asking for tips easier and less awkward than ever. A simple flip of a screen with a suggested amount displayed, usually 18 to 25%, is often all an employee needs to solicit a tip. Plus, the added social pressure of an expectant employee watching a customer makes their selection creates a psychological element of shame that motivates tipping. You should exercise your own agency in this instance. Resist your robot masters, but reward those that give commendable service. No one is entitled to a tip. Any social pressure you feel to provide one is purely personal. And with that, I yield my time.
So Lethe, that was interesting. And it's interesting actually that you cited the Pew Research, because I looked into the same study. So I think you quoted it there. It was 72% of people feel that the pressure to tip has risen in the last 5 years. Is that accurate assessment?
That is accurate.
Right. So if we're discussing, I guess, the resistance of tipping culture, if 72% of people, I forget the exact number, it was over 10,000, but
About
would that not
12,000.
sure, yeah, would that not imply that the expectation of tipping has increased socially?
Absolutely not. The expectation is exactly the same as it always was. Everybody wants to get tipped, don't they?
Well, I mean, I guess in contrast to the stat that we both seem to agree on, 72% of people feel that the expectation has risen. So wouldn't this, so how could you say it hasn't, I suppose?
So this is feelings based. It's not reality based. There is no real world difference in the amount of expectation of tipping or not tipping. Just the fact that there's a point of sale system or some other device that's promoting the idea of tipping, maybe you just never thought about it before, but everybody's always been looking for a tip for the services they render. So I think this is just a perception issue.
Okay. Well, so in the same poll, for the Pew Research, it says the majority of Americans said that they would tip 15% or less for an average meal for like a sit-down restaurant, which is probably the context where tipping is most common. So in this case, it was 6 and 10 or 57%. So 50%, 7% said that 15% is sort of a baseline. Would you agree then that the default options, generally when you go out to a restaurant, now they will start at 20% and maybe 20, 25 to 30%. That's becoming more and more standard. Would you agree with that?
I would say they put that on the board, but that doesn't mean that's what you have to do.
I agree. And as you mentioned, people have free will. But if you were to presented with this, the handheld device, it's time to pay, and those are
Mhm.
your options. You would have to select other, and then you can, I believe, either do a dollar amount or a percentage amount. So you don't believe that by having these default options that there is zero social pressure that is being placed, whether or not you decide to do it. Would you agree that there is some level of pressure to do so?
Crazy as it is, Testy, I have this exact issue where I go and I always hit other and I give them exactly what I want to give them, even if that's zero. Social pressure does not force or impose anything upon anyone. Now, we may have the issue where discretional income has decreased, and maybe now we feel like we need to give people more, but that's just the reality of what capitalism has done to us.
Sure. I'm almost out of time here. I will say as just a closing thought, I would agree with you in a technical sense that tipping is optional. I believe that there is a massive social pressure, which even though you're unwilling to quite bite that bullet, even with the unethical consumption under capitalism, I think that you are underplaying, I guess, the impact or severity of that social pressure over time.
There wasn't really a question there, Lethe, but since you are welcome to answer the question if you have one.
Yeah, so absolutely. Like, I think if people are giving exceptional service, it should be something that you want to do to tip. If you feel you are being pressured to tip, that's all the more reason not to tip in the first place. Don't incentivize a system that is bullying you. Like, definitely don't do that.
All right,
So
cheers.
that's what I would answer to that.
Yep. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and go to your opening there, Testes. 3 minutes is on the clock. I'll start it up when you start to talk.
Sure. I'll start off with my opening just on that very last point. If you are being bullied or feeling pressured, that sounds like something that you might want to resist, but maybe that's just me. So, as the affirmative, when we say the tipping culture should be resisted, I want to just be super clear, and nobody has said this. I'm just kind of getting out ahead of it. We're not saying that the service workers are the problem here, and we're not saying that people should go out and just stop tipping. Right? I think that hopefully we'd all agree that that would have some negative consequences, negative effects. So I would agree. What tipping is intended for is giving a little bit of extra money for genuine gratuity, for genuine good service. So it's no longer just a small thank you. It's no longer just, hey, you did a good job. Here's a tip. In America, it has become a built in expectation where the customer is pressured to pay the worker's income and subsidize it, while the worker is pressured to perform friendliness, patience, emotional control, and sometimes even deference. It's almost like they're just making them do a little song and dance, making them jump through these hoops because they understand that you're responsible for subsidizing their wages. So the tip screens are not just a personal annoyance. As Lethe cited, 72% of Americans say that tipping is expected in more places today than it was 5 years ago. So culture is not standing still. This is expanding, and this is one of the reasons it needs to be resisted. So historically, it kind of makes sense. If we're getting into a little bit more of a class hierarchy thing, just to briefly touch on it, what tipping was originally intended as was this is when somebody had a patronage, and they were essentially rewarding a servant. Lethe brought up the railroad example. So I don't think that that was good. I don't think that's necessarily a good system. However, uh, you know, looking into that context, it became massively more popular after the Civil War. And was attached to service industries where employers could underpay their workers and shift the wage burden onto the customers. So, just as a very quick statistic here, so federally, tipped workers can be paid a direct cash wage of only $2.13 an hour. The customer's tips count towards the rest of the wage. This is literally you are subsidizing your server's wages. This responsibility has now been placed onto the consumer. So even though they're legally required to reach the minimum wage, the employer would have to make up that shortfall if they don't hit their tip minimum. This is exactly the point. There's an overlap in the law that is forcing customers to now subsidize wages for the employees. Excuse me. Uh, so there's a deeper problem here. So tipping puts part of the worker's income in the hands of the customer's mood. It's now at the customer's whim. They could provide excellent service and receive zero tip, or they could provide poor service and, due to social obligation, receive a tip that is undeserved. The issue is not whether kindness should exist or if it shouldn't. The issue is whether we should accept a culture where wages become favors, where businesses rely on social pressure, and where workers have to smile just so that they can pay rent. That's what we should resist.
Okay. And Lethe, who's going to cross-examine testicles?
Our man Loodle.
All right. Let's get over there.
Everybody hear me? We're good?
Yep.
Yep,
There you
loud
go.
and clear.
Three minutes is on the clock for you, Loodle. Go ahead and cross-examine as you see fit, sir.
Perfect. So let's start with one of the last things you said, that the tipping economy, as you put it, puts the duty to subsidize workers in the hands of the employers of those workers. How is that not the same as every other? Sorry, go
I
ahead.
may have misspoke. At least what I intended or thought I said was that you are putting in the onus onto the customers to subsidize the wage of the employees. If I did say employers in that instance, I apologize.
Oh, you're fine.
That would have been...
No, you're fine. Then I'll grant that. No worries, no worries. So then, but you also said right before that if the tips the employee earns don't add up to the standard minimum wage, the employer compensates them, right?
That's correct. Up to the state minimum wage, if I recall. Yeah.
Yeah, so up to the state. Yeah, that's accurate. So do you the FSLA, which legalized tipping for a less of a wage in America, right? It was in 1938. Do you have any idea why that was created?
Not off the top of my head, no.
All right, cool. Well, then I'll stop cross-examining for a second and just make a statement that the FSLA was created in the midst of the Dust Bowl Depression era because nobody could get jobs. And so they found out that if somebody could get a job for a lesser wage, but require on the dedication and the quality of their service to make their wage work, that was better for the economy of America at the time. I would argue it is still to this day. So let me ask you a question now based upon that. Is that if somebody excels as an exceptional server, exceptional person who provides the service, should not an American be able to tip them to thank them for their exceptional going out of the way for their service to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't believe I spoke against not
Oh,
tipping altogether. So I think, yeah, if you receive exceptional service, I believe absolutely you, as a show of gratitude, genuine gratitude,
no,
you should be
that's great.
competent. Yeah.
So let me spring on that for a second then and say then so as we agree on that fundamental premise, I think, as we just both voiced, what is the difference between that and tipping culture in America? How would you differentiate those two things as it stands right now?
Sure. So I highlighted a little bit in my opening, but um, I believe that there is a heavy social expectation. The easiest thing to highlight, as I said, is when you're handed sort of the machine, you have these default percentages from 20, 25, 30%.
Sure.
And citing the poll, most Americans still feel comfortable with a 15%. So I think that alone places some social pressure on
Are you
people to.
arguing that somehow the necessity of convenience that instead of clicking other and hitting zero or clicking no tip, that the way the devices are set up is the tipping culture in America? The devices
Not
are the culture?
No, not solely. I mean, if you ask for a singular example, more
Well, I
more
was just
broadly.
trying to just ground it in what you're. I'm just trying to understand your position better.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, of course. So I think more broadly, we have seen this also expand to other industries where you typically, most commonly, just as a very quick example, and
Mhm.
this is most seen as like in restaurants, sit-down services. Most commonly, other things that are cited would be maybe for haircuts, which is also sort of understandable. But now it's also spreading into things like coffee shops. So I would say that this tipping culture has spread to other industries. This is an example maybe of this being expanded.
All right. So we are now going to go ahead and go to Little Miss. 3 minutes is on the clock for you, sir. Uninterrupted opening. Go ahead and start it up when you're ready.
Thank you. I think the fundamental thing we need to understand in today's debate with today's prompt is that tipping culture is the idea, and our opponents on the affirmative didn't define it. So let's give it a sense. And I asked some questions to get us there, but let's just get there all the way. So there's no more ambiguity going around. Okay. Tipping culture in America is the idea if you are provided a service and you have the financial means to provide that service and the financial means to provide compensation for that service, and somebody goes above and beyond, then at that point in time, it's your ability, your right, your free will to tip them to encourage their good service, or on the same side, if they provide crappy service, to tip them a penny or tip them nothing. That is what tipping culture in America is. It's the ability to incentivize in a free market economy the providing of excellent service by masters of their crafts and to disincentivize people who have provided you a crappy service. So the whole point being is that it began as in 1938, the FSLA authorized tipping so you can have a lower wage and the tip has to compensate you, right? So this was a Depression, Dust Bowl era thing. But the whole point of it was, even then, even in the legislative debates that Congress had about it, was about the fact that if somebody goes above and beyond, the customer should have the ability to tip them, to make them compensated for the above and beyond service they're giving. And at the same time, if somebody's such a crappy server or there's like such a crappy job serving them, that they can tip them nothing. And at that point in time, it's on the employer who employed the server to compensate them up to a minimum wage. This ensures accountability, it ensures cohesion, it ensures the way that America is a free market economy, generally speaking, as well as to incentivize the above and beyond service from people who have means, those being served, those who don't have means, the servers are being equitably compensated. And also, it encourages good performance and inhibits bad performance on the part of the server. At the same point in time, I'd go a step farther to say that the basic idea of tipping culture, right? Tipping culture is the culture in which you tip to incentivize excellent service, and you tip to de-incentivize, or you don't tip to de-incentivize bad service. It's the way things are meshed out. And so I think the whole device you get that has a pre-programmed thing is really red herring here. Because as my opponent admitted, that the device is not tipping culture. Tipping culture is what underlies that. So whether or not it pre-programs 15%, people know how to hit no or zero or put in $1 or whatever they want to hit. So somehow that a device could capture American tipping culture. I just want to reject that out front, and I think my team will do so as well, and say that a device does not designate culture. I mean, I have an Xbox, and that doesn't mean that I spend money in Microsoft points. I stand open for cross-examination.
All right. And testicles, who is going to be doing that? I suppose it would be Vigilante. Right?
Indeed. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
How you doing, brother?
Give me 1 second. Let me get there.
Hello again.
Hello again, good sir.
Give me 1 second, gentlemen. I'm sorry. I got to do like math and shit.
You know. You
A2
got a cute
enter.
hat,
There we
Benji. I
go.
like your hat.
All right. 3 minutes is on the clock. Vigilante, cross-examine as you see fit, sir.
Yeah, so you gave your definition of tipping culture, right? So do we not see on social media people shaming others for not tipping and when ordering food or going out to eat? Is that not part of tipping culture?
I mean, I think you have a fundamental problem there is that people who are posting them ordering a meal and not tipping are opening themselves up to shame. So, like, I mean, if you just want to live
Yeah, I
your
mean, we
life
also
and
get
have your
the
free
servers.
agency,
We also get servers and DoorDashers and stuff posting the orders and the fact that they didn't get tips.
but that's subjective. I mean, maybe the DoorDasher like put a dog turd in their food. Like, who knows why that happened, right? So I'm saying, like, the fact that there exists a social media outrage if somebody curates a video to post a certain kind of narrative, that goes for everything. I don't know how it's unique to the
Yeah,
argument.
the whole point is that shame is part of the tipping culture, correct?
No,
You don't think people actively shaming people on social media is part of tipping culture?
okay. Tipping culture, as I defined it, because nobody else had, is incentivizing good service and disincentivizing bad service. And so, if somebody was a crappy service, provided crappy services to me, right? At that point in time, I should not tip them to make them hopefully do better for the next thing, because that's the industry they're in. And no amount of
Yeah,
social
that's
pressure or shame.
the idealistic version of
Oh,
how
wait,
tipping
wait.
should work, but that's not
Okay.
how it actually works in reality. The
So
reality
you're,
is there's a shame behind not tipping.
let me make sure I'm still manning your point. You're saying that because of pressure from social media accounts, people are somehow like strong-armed into tipping more than they otherwise would have. So it's not reflecting of good service. It's just like a pressure campaign from the online mobs.
Yes, the social shaming that we do of people who don't tip contributes to tipping culture and is the reason why tipping culture is bad in America. It's not, the reality is that tipping culture isn't what you're describing it as, it's the shame behind not tipping. The fact that tipping is borderline seen as a requirement nowadays rather than supplementing somebody's wage.
I'm sorry, I'm just like, you just said that like tipping culture is borderline socially required as opposed to supplementing someone's wage. But aren't those like even if it's required, the supplement to the wage happens anyways, right? So I'm just confused about what that means. I want to
Yeah,
answer. I just don't know what you mean.
it's not yeah, no, that's fine. It's not just that it's you're supplementing somebody's wage because they gave you good service. It's socially required because of the fear of getting shamed on social media.
I mean, I think anybody who ever has worked a service industry job can tell you a couple hundred times where they haven't gotten any tips. So how is that actually valid in practice?
I've also worked a serving job, but that's all
I mean,
anecdotal experience, right?
I mean,
All right.
everybody's never gotten tips.
All right, there you go. So we are now going to go ahead and go to you, Vigi. 3 minutes on the clock for your opening, sir. I'll start it up when you're ready.
Yeah, no employer has the right to pay poverty wages and outsource their wage responsibility onto consumers. That is the core of this debate and everything else that follows it. Let's be clear about what resistance means here. Resistance does not mean stiffing your server. It does not mean leaving a 0 tip on the receipt. While the person who just spent an hour making sure that your dinner went well goes home wondering how they're going to pay rent. When somebody's ability to feed their family and stay housed depends on the generosity of strangers, that person cannot bear the cost of your protest. Resistance means legislation, full stop. The system we have built tells service workers your employer is not fully responsible for your wages. The people sitting at your tables are. We have taken the most basic obligation of employment, pay the people who work for you enough to live on, and we have transferred it to the consumers through a social ritual enforced by guilt. That is not generosity. That is a system that has failed so completely that we no longer even ask whether a business makes enough to pay its workers. We ask whether customers are going to be decent enough to make up the difference. This two-tiered structure doesn't just fail workers economically, it degrades the entire labor relationship. It tells tipped workers they are worth less than the cook in the kitchen, less than the person at the register, less than anyone whose industry wasn't carved out of federal wage law. There is no principle reason for that distinction. This is a system that only benefits employers and calls it culture. Tipping should be what it once was, a genuine voluntary expression of gratitude for exceptional service, not a survival mechanism, not a wage supplement, not a guilt tax on a tablet screen before your coffee is even made. The path back to that standard runs through legislation that guarantees every American worker in every industry gets a wage they can actually live on. I'll close on the words of the greatest economically progressive president this country has ever seen, whose legacy has been systematically dismantled by the neoliberal consensus that took hold after Ronald Reagan rewrote the rules of American economic life. It seems to me to be equally plain that no business in which for existence on paying less than a living wage to its workers has any right to continue in this country. By business, I mean the whole of commerce as well as the whole of industry. By workers, I mean all workers, the white collar class, as well as the men in overalls. And by living wage, I mean the bare sustenance level. I mean the wages of a decent living. This principle from FDR has not aged. The question before the audience is whether we are willing to act on it.
All right. And if I'm keeping track, I do believe that Ghosty is going to be doing the cross-examination here. Ma'am, this is 3 minutes on the clock for you to control. Ask questions, poke holes, set up arguments. It's your time to control at the end of the day, though. So I'll start up when you start to talk. You are muted.
Thank you. All right. So who typically makes more money? A cashier at a grocery store or a bartender?
Typically speaking, the bartender.
Right. And that's going to be because of tipping, correct?
Yes, but it also depends on traffic. If the bar's not very popular, then their wages are mostly going to come from their employer, and they're also not going to make as much as the person at the grocery store.
Maybe. Typically, though, you can make a career out of being a bartender or a hairdresser or a waitress, more so than working at a grocery store and get paid more without even having a degree, right?
Yeah, but do bartenders typically get paid the half minimum wage that servers do?
I
My-
believe so, or
I
maybe.
I believe generally speaking,
Okay.
bartenders get paid minimum wage plus tips.
Okay, so even if they did get paid minimum wage, though, the tipping culture would still allow them to make a lot more money to the point where they can buy a house, make it literally their career, and sometimes only work weekends. So they're working less hours than at a grocery store, but making more money because of tipping culture.
Yeah, but
Do you disagree?
the reason why that works with certain jobs is like bartenders, baristas, and stuff like that, right? Is because they get paid minimum wage plus tips. So tips are actually a supplemental income. They don't get their income cut in half like with what servers do.
So without tipping culture, we would basically be making bartenders really not be able to bartend and have a livable wage because most of them only work on weekends and they would be making
Well, we're not saying that we should get rid of tipping in general or people shouldn't tip. We're saying that we need to get rid of the tipping culture that incentivizes people to only tip. And where tipping is the primary source of people's wage. The problem with tipping culture is the fact that with like DoorDash drivers or servers, things like that, the primary source of your wage is the tips that you get. It's not the actual base pay, unless you're in California or New York, who have actually done what we're talking about and gotten rid of these things and require for companies to actually pay a decent wage up front, and then they get So specifically, the reason why this works with bartenders, right, is because they generally speaking get paid an actual wage on top of the tips. So the average bartender in the US makes about $16 an hour. So because of the fact that they get the actual wage plus tips is what makes it where they can actually make a life off of being a bartender. That's the difference here. Not the fact that these they the tipping in general is a thing. It's the fact that servers specifically, DoorDash drivers and other gig workers and stuff don't get an actual living wage unless you're outside in California or New York. There are in a couple other states, I think, where it's the base wage plus tips. That system is fine. It's specifically the issue with tipping culture is the fact that we allow a lot of different things like gig work and servers to specifically basically cuck the workers and say all of your income comes from the consumer. That's the problem with it.
All right. And now 3 minutes is going to go on the clock for you, ma'am. This is your uninterrupted opening. Go ahead and start it up when you're ready.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. It would be great if all these companies could pay a base wage and then on top of it include tipping. One, I want to point out that really doesn't have anything to do with tipping culture. That has more to do with the businesses not wanting to pay a flat wage for their workers. Also, the problem with that is that people tip more because they know that waiters and waitresses don't make minimum wage, and the minimum wage for them is like $2.65 or something. So people will tip less if there was a law saying that waiters and waitresses are supposed to make minimum wage and then you're supposed to tip on top of it. Also, the solution to that would be to raise prices on food in order to give or products in order to give the service workers a minimum wage or a flat wage. And we know that this is going to mostly benefit the business and not the workers themselves. If you make a career out of being a service worker or a bartender, you can make $100 an hour, and you can work less hours than working a minimum or a flat wage job. And this is really important for people who don't have degrees, which are usually people who go into these jobs. So if you can make a career out of your skill, this is when tipping culture is actually a really good thing. It incentivizes higher skilled workers, it incentivizes good work, and it allows customers to reward and show appreciation for their work, especially in something with like hairdressing, where every hairstyle and haircut is going to be different and completely personalized. This also works with artists or somebody who works close with you, like a pet sitter or a babysitter, someone nannying your kids. Tipping culture allows these people to make a career out of their skill. The next biggest complaint I've heard against tipping culture is that companies are requesting tips for like non-service items. So like tipping Uber Eats, tipping a restaurant that you order Uber Eats from, tipping for fast food, tipping for an online purchase. And again, all of this is optional. No one's forcing you. And the good thing is, like, if you want to support that business and you have extra money, provide a tip. I think that's a great thing. I think it incentivizes good service. Hold on, sorry, I kind of wrote a long thing. I don't have a lot of time left. The people complaining about tips are always the tippers, not the ones receiving tips. If you feel guilted into tipping, that's kind of a you problem. And lastly, Matt Walsh called tipping non-American, leading me to believe tipping culture is actually extremely American.
All right. And now, if I'm keeping track at home, I believe Groofus, you're going to be doing the cross-examination here. 3 minutes is on the clock. I'll start it up when you start to talk.
All right, Rusty, you said raising the base wage doesn't necessarily have much to do with tipping. So if every tipped worker had a great base wage tomorrow, would tipping culture itself, the guilt, the social pressure, the ambiguity about what's happening and what's being paid for still be the problem in review, or would it disappear?
Well, first of all, I don't think shaming people for not tipping specifically waiters and waitresses is a bad thing. It is, and maybe my team members disagree with me, but I do personally agree with that. If you don't have money to tip, you don't have money to go out to eat, unless they are getting maybe a minimum wage. But it is a service, so like I do believe in tipping, and that's why I think tipping is a good thing. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
You called, requests for non-service items optional, right? When a screen at a checkout defaults to 20% option, and you have to actively search for a way to opt out or enter 0. In what sense is that meaningfully different from the obligation I described in my opening, just applied somewhere else?
There's always an option for no tip, or there's an option for customize where you can put in a dollar amount. I've gone to Starbucks a good amount in my life. I'm not like a crazy Starbucks guru or anything, but I don't think I've ever tipped at Starbucks. Now, I'm 30 now. I have like a little bit more stable money, and I go to a local small business coffee shop. I do like to tip them because they provide great coffee. I like know the people in there, and I don't mind tipping them. But I've never personally felt pressured by a screen to tip.
Okay. Do you think current tipping culture is fair to workers in general?
I think it benefits workers, yes.
Okay. And so in that vein, do you think that tipping culture as it currently works should remain, or should it change?
I think it should remain. Again, like I would love it if companies paid their workers more. I think raising the minimum wage for really, I mean, everyone, but also for waiters and waitresses from 265 to a higher wage, I'm for that. But again, tipping is what allows them to actually make a career and have like a stable money off of a skill without a degree. That's because of tipping.
All right. I'll go ahead and end my
All right.
thoughts there.
Right on. All right, so that concludes all of our, I believe, that was everybody. That was everybody's openings and cross examinations. So we're going to go ahead and go into the championship rounds. Now, I'm trying to put these into an order, but it looks to me like this is nice and convenient since it's already pulled up. Rufus, you're going to go ahead and stay up here. You and Loodle are going to start us off for 10 minutes. This is open forum conversation. You guys just go ahead and talk amongst yourselves, and we'll be listening. So start it up.
How you doing, Griffiths?
Hey, how you doing? Good.
I'm well, man. I'm well. I could be earning tips, but not here, though. So real quickly, could you? Because this has been something that's kind of been like bandied about all debate. Do you have a definition for your side about what you think tipping culture is?
So I define tipping culture is the contemporary American social norm in which gratuities are formally voluntary but socially expected, and where those gratuities often function as part of a worker's expected compensation.
Okay, but do you understand the difference between a gratuity and a tip under law, if nothing else?
No, I'm not super well versed in U.S. law code.
Okay, would you mind if
Yeah,
I?
go ahead. Go
All right,
ahead.
no, I'm just being completely honest. So a gratuity is an automatic fee imposed upon the person. For example, if you want you want to rent the ballroom, right, for 30 minutes or for an hour and have 60 people there, right? They're going to tack on a gratuity. It might be 20, 25, 30%, depending on the establishment, right? So that's an automatic thing that because you're requesting the service to take out the large portion of the restaurant itself for a certain period of time, that they are allowed to tack on to your bill for that service of not only serving you food, drinks, etc., but also giving their space to you, right? Now, a tip is a purely voluntary thing, which is based upon the performance of service. It's not automatic. It's not mandatory. It's completely voluntary. We
Right.
separate those two
And
things.
no, I see what you're meaning. I was just more so using them interchangeably because I
Oh,
couldn't really think of another synonym.
no, I don't blame you. I'm just saying this is for the sake of argument right now.
Sure.
Can we separate them? Because, for example, let me, if I may, Europe, right? I know we're not talking about Europe, we're talking about America, but in Europe, right, you'll get a gratuity added on if there are a certain amount of people in your party just taking up space, right? But that's a gratuity, not a tip. In Europe, they don't tip you shit. They don't even get just a tip, just for a second, just if it's fun. They don't even do that.
Yeah.
So a gratuity is something that if you're encumbering the business for a certain point of time and taking up their wait staff, right? The business needs to be compensated because they could be doing 20 other tables where your group is there, right? And so they need to have an extra bit on there to accommodate your party. That's a gratuity, right?
Right. So, and to my knowledge, you are required. A restaurant's required to disclose this upfront.
Yeah,
Or
yeah. When you make, I mean, it's at the bottom of every menu.
Right.
If you call into reservation, they tell you parties of 10 or more or 6 or more. It depends on the restaurant, right? Require a
It's
20% gratuity. So when you're making that reservation, you're opting in contractually to that gratuity being put on your bill.
right. So I don't necessarily think this. I would say this system would be preferable over
Okay.
the current system because my whole case has really been that it's kind of manipulative to
Well,
say
let
this
me
is
give
the
you a,
price.
sorry,
This
sorry.
is the
Sorry,
price.
go ahead.
It's manipulative to say this is the price on the menu, and but then fully expect some sort of voluntary interaction beforehand. Versus
So,
if you have a gratuity, right? If you have a gratuity on the menu, it's stated up front. It's whether it's a percentage or honestly, preferably just be an increase in the price. But
I mean,
regardless of which, it's upfront. It's
under
upfront.
U.S.
It's more
law,
honest.
it's always a percentage. It can be between 15 and 30 under U.S. law, but it's always a percentage.
I know. I'm saying as an or have a gratuity, or you just do away with the gratuities and just increase the price. I'm saying an as an or. I'm not saying.
No, I think I understand you. And if I say anything wrong, jump in and correct me.
Mhm.
What I'm hearing you say is that so like gratuity seems to be a tipping-ish thing that is actually kind of set in stone the way a wage is set in stone. So that if
Yes.
you are dealing, because again, you have to compensate the employer for taking out half of their restaurant to dedicate it to this one group, right?
Mhm.
And you also have to compensate the server for not getting tips from other tables for taking care of this one group dedicatedly, right? And that's where the gratuity comes. Basically, it's a mechanism to not allow the server to get stiffed, or also the server to be also running 30 other tables, so the party you're agreeing to pay more up front doesn't get the service they are entitled to. Right? That's the
Right.
gratuity side. Can we agree on that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And
Right.
and for what it's worth, I have much less of an issue with a system or a restaurant or whatever tipping system or whichever establishment or firm. If they were to use that system primarily, I would have much less of an issue with this whole thing.
Okay, so but the thing about that then though, right, is that then the only servers who are entitled to that gratuity that's guaranteed for them are the servers the employer allows to cater to large parties. The thing about tipping that differentiates from that is very essential is that say you're a badass server, bartender, whatever, right? And you just are this is your life. You when you were a baby, you used to read, I don't know, Count of Monte Cristo or something, decide you want to be a server, or read Batman and decide you want to be Alfred one day. And this is your life's dedication, right? And you're just the most best. I mean, I tell you one time, I used to wait at a truck stop called the Country Kitchen. which was the worst job so don't accuse me of being intelligent because I know I'm not. But the point being is like, so I waited graveyards, right? We got $2.15 an
Sure.
hour plus the truckers, and I don't have a good pair of boobies on me, so they didn't tip me shit. And so like I would come home making like 75 cents in tips every night, right? And they would compensate me up. But I think the whole point is like if I am working the right shift and doing the right thing, so even if there's a gratuity, like the Kiwanis Club of Atlanta has rented out the back room, and there are 2 servers doing that on gratuity basis, right? The rest of the servers who aren't chosen to do that from the employer, right, should be able to go around and make adequate compensation by doing excellent service to the people who are not part of that group. Right, and if they don't, then they don't get tipped as much, and maybe they'll up their game next time. Or maybe the poor. I don't know if you ever heard the song "One Meatball." It's an old. You get no bread with one meatball. It's a depression. The guy goes to an Italian restaurant, orders one meatball off the a la carte menu, and wants to eat the bread because he's starving because of the Great Depression. And the waiter's like, "You get no bread with one meatball." Well, again, like that, there's no tip coming there because the guy can barely afford a fucking meatball. But the whole point is like, to constantly is like the gratuity thing. I agree is great, and that's why it's structured and that's why it's firm, right?
Right, and I'm saying,
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just I'm saying, I think it would be better if gratuities were just applied to every table. Just take it further and replace tips.
Well, that's how Europe does it. But the problem with that then is that doesn't incentivize good service. And I think our argument has been is that tipping culture, call it what you will, right? Is that the individual has agency to give something above and beyond. So let me ask you a hypo then. Let me ask you a hypo. So if we have your ideal world, I'm calling it that, where we have everything's gratuity-based, right? Yeah. And if even though you're paying a 20% gratuity to your server, if you walk in the door, you're paying it. You add to your price of meal. If that server does above and beyond good service, could you be not allowed to tip them? Because there are places that don't allow tips too.
I'm fine in this instance. Tips would be fine because they're already getting at that point. They're also not getting. They're at that point. They're not relying on it, right? That's a part of both Testies and Vigis.
The servers aren't relevant, but the whole point is the servers don't have to be relying on it. The U.S. law that says if you don't make as much as the cook, that restaurant is responsible to compensate you up to that point.
Right.
So there's nobody who's getting stiff and not able to pay the rent. They're making as much as the cooks or the possibility of more, depending on how well they perform and how well they interact with their client base.
Right. And this kind of, you kind of bring up my point I wanted to get up at some point during this, which is I don't think empirically that most people, or most servers' tips and whatnot are really paid based off of their off how good they serve. They are paid based off of their appearance or how's the size of their table, right? And I have empirics for this. I have 2 of them.
That's fine. My question is like, okay, so are you defining tipping culture based on some empirical data of the average tip share? Because that's not what you said before.
No, I'm not. I'm using this more as a response to some other points that both you made in your opening and also Ghosty and Lethe made in their opening. I'm not necessarily making this a central point of my argument.
All right, so let me just ask you one final question. Is like, so will you agree with me that the whole thing of the tip is from the individual agency of the tipper to the tippee? And it's based upon, and if I got $15 in my pocket and my lunch costs $14.99, then I am the asshole. I'll tip them a penny, even if it was great service. And maybe I'll thank their hand and say, thank you, I'm an asshole. I would tip you more, but I'm broke ass some bitch. Right? Maybe that's the case. But the whole point is that the agency, the onus is on the tipper to give to the tippee based upon their evaluation of the service if they are able. Is that how you understand it?
Right. I mean, I would agree that's currently how the system works, of course.
All right, cool. Thank you.
All right, cheers. So, next up, we are going to Testy and Ghosty. We're going to go ahead and put 10 minutes on the clock for you guys. You can pick up the conversation where they left off, take it a completely different direction. It's yours to do as you see fit.
Sure. So, I mean, did you have any comments? I think the distinction between gratuity and tip is fine. One thing I may throw in there, I don't know if you agree with this, Ghosty, but would you say that more colloquially, not talking legally here, do you think that there's a little bit of a conflation in people's minds when they see gratuity versus a tip, or do you think that like people separate those two things pretty well in their mind?
There is probably conflation.
Okay. Would you say that that's like, let's say that instead of saying gratuity on the receipt, if it just said service charge or obligatory charge, something, do you think that would help maybe change that perception so people don't sort of, make that conflation?
Uh, I mean, what's the difference? Just calling it something different,
Well,
or
yeah, essentially. I mean, because I would say, at least on the softer side of things, you know, I think this could be an example when we're saying we're resisting tipping culture more broadly. I would say that calling it something and defining it, it does have to be, I think, little said on either on the menu, I know on the receipt, in some way they are supposed to signal. Anecdotally, I have been in a position before where this was not disclosed, and so tips are sometimes provided on top of a gratuity in some cases. But you could, that's a one-off. I'm not going to use that here as an example. But I guess if you agree that there can be some conflation, or if the average person doesn't necessarily know the difference, that maybe making that more clear could be beneficial.
I mean, is that supposed to make people feel less manipulated? Is that your argument, or
When you say less manipulated, I mean I suppose so. I mean, if we're talking about manipulation, sure, like we can leave that just standing. Maybe we can revisit it if that's okay.
okay?
Uh, sure. So I guess more broadly, like let's say the ideal, right? We're talking about the ideal that a tip is a reflection of service that is beyond the ordinary, right? Kind of above and beyond. I think in
Mm,
your opening, you you did mention it is sort of a supplementary. You said servers don't really make wages, and I think you tied that with, kind of the classic line of if you can't afford to go out and eat, like stay at home type of thing, right? So
yes. Oh, well, if
so
you
would
can't
you?
afford to tip, you can't afford to go out and eat,
Sure, sure. So do you
which is a
think that?
privilege, right?
Yeah, no, fair enough. Do you think that it is the customer's responsibility or the employer's responsibility to make up any sort of shortfall in those wages?
So I agree. Again, I agree that it would be great if employers paid better wages and raised the minimum wage for waiters and waitresses, since it hasn't been raised like literally ever since it was put into place. I think that would be a great thing. Um, but the data shows that people tip more knowing that their service workers aren't getting paid that much. So if all of a sudden restaurant workers now get paid minimum wage, overall in the end, based on the data, they're going to end up bringing home less money than they would have before. So like sure it sounds great in practice, um, but in reality, I don't think it's going to end up benefiting the service workers. Also, again, it doesn't really have to do with tipping culture. That's more of a how businesses run. So, but
Well, within the specific industry, I would agree. Like tipping is not really part of like, for example, if somebody were to, like, so let's say a car mechanic, they're undeniably offering you a service, right? Changing your tire, maybe changing your oil. But socially, that you don't tip in a lot of different things where services are provided, right? So it is kind of specific to a handful of industries when we talk about service. Is that fair?
yeah, sure.
Okay, sure. So, um, I would say that when it's baked in, I guess, in this way, um, let's say that you can easily imagine this hypothetical. There's a restaurant that the business is just not so hot that day, right? So nobody is coming in. There are no customers. I mean, in this regard, I agree with you. It would be great if the employer were to pay a minimum wage, and then sort of anything made on top of that would be, I would say, more beneficial to the server. but it's a little bit of a crapshoot. I don't know if you'd agree, but like maybe it'll be super busy on like Friday, Saturday, Sundays. So like those are the shifts everybody wants, right? Everybody's out for the weekend.
Yeah.
That's kind of the prime time. But maybe you're working during the week. You're probably so it's extremely inconsistent as opposed to having that reliability of having I guess a base wage. I'm not trying to gish gallop or anything, but just on the point you made about I think you said you had some empirics on wages. So like let's just say as a hypothetical, let's say we're going to bake the cost of tips into the cost of service. So now your burger, instead of costing, $10, and now it costs $20. Do you think that that's like a suitable solution in saying that, hey, we're going to pay the workers a base wage? You still have the option of tipping. Nothing is against that, but there's no expectation. Like there's no obligation. There never has been. But now the you know for a fact that the workers don't have to rely on tipping. Would that be a
Right.
preferred system?
No, because again, people, based on the data, it shows that people tip more when they know that people aren't making a minimum or a flat wage. So the reason that so many people can make a career out of being a waiter is because of tipping and tipping culture, even though they only make technically like $3 an hour. So if they were to start making minimum wage, people are going to start tipping a lot less and ultimately bring home less money. So it doesn't actually, in the end up benefiting the service worker.
So I mean, I'm not sure exactly where you're getting a source from, or that particular source from. I do have a source here. This is a study that they did in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, where I believe they looked at a number of restaurants here, and they raised the minimum wage. I will post this. I'll send this to Horse, and I will post it in the chat. But they looked at they had raised the minimum wage, and they saw that it didn't have, I guess, these sort of deleterious effects on the workers' wages. So and this is not
Probably because
this is
people don't know probably people don't realize that they actually got their wages raised. That's most likely why.
sure. I guess to get to the heart of it, I think what you're saying highlights a very real tension and like a very real issue is that if people are more charitable or people are more empathetic because they think in the back of their head they have this understanding that these workers are not making a quote unquote fair wage. I'm using that, you could say it's a bit of a loaded term, but if they're not making a quote unquote fair wage, say it's below minimum, then would you at least agree that that is in some way a manipulation, or that it creates some sort of social obligation to tip regardless of service?
It does create a social obligation. But again, I don't think that's a bad thing because it does benefit the workers. I personally would rather, because the only solution to that is, again, okay, giving these workers a flat wage and then raising the prices on the food or the products. But we know, like, when companies make more money, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to give it to their workers. So in the end, it just makes the business profit more and the workers profiting less. I would rather pay my service worker more like a tip than it just going to the overall company.
Well, so tips aren't even necessarily diplomatic. I mean, Fiji brought up the point of bartenders, but let's say the cooks, right? Like they generally will get like a flat wage. So there is a scenario where you could give amazing service, but let's say your food is slightly undercooked or something is off with your drink or whatever it may be. You would be affected for something that had nothing to do with you. And so I would say that it's actually quite unfair to place on the worker, regardless of I think the issue that you're sort of at the whim of the customer because I would agree with you. I think that they are relying on tips to supplement their just being able to live and maybe pay rent or buy groceries, whatever it might be. And so it does create, I would say, this perverse incentive that they have to be somewhat performative. And I mean, I guess I'm
Well, they're at
discussing two
work,
different
right?
issues.
Like
Sure,
they're
there's
at
a
work. They kind of
performativity.
should be.
Sure, there's a performativity to work, especially in the service industry. I am mixing two things together, but I guess just on the original point, yeah. So I guess why? Because tips are shared generally amongst the cooks or the bartenders, or most businesses
Yes.
sort of have that structure, right? So why would it be fair for only the servers to, I guess, face this wage supplementation, where the cooks and the bartenders are entitled to like a base wage or possibly a higher wage.
Well, like you said, they're sharing it, right? So if the cooks mess up and people tip less, then ultimately that's going to affect them too, right?
But you sort of understand that how much control they have over that process. It's kind of at the whim of the person either providing or not providing a tip. And certainly you've been in a situation where somebody may provide great service and what you think is a fair tip, they might think, oh, this kind of sucks. It's like tough shit, in that particular
Mhm.
circumstance. Or there could be times, and I would say to the social obligation aspect, times where service has not been above and beyond. It's been either standard or maybe even subpar. And I also have that same recognition that you do, that I'm not a sociopath. Unless they spill a drink on me or they're extremely rude, I'm probably going to leave some kind of tip. Like that is sort of baked in, right? So is that a fair assessment?
Sure, but like again, yes, that can happen. People can tip unfairly, or people can tip more than maybe the person deserved. But overall, the tipping culture, this is why people pick waitressing jobs and bartending jobs over a minimum wage job at a grocery store. You get to work less hours and you get to make more money in general. So, like, sure, there might be a one off of a couple of people not tipping their fair share, but it seems ultimately it works out for most of these people who can
Uh,
make a livable money off of this.
sure. And I think we might be out of time there, Horace. If I could just get one final line in there, or oh, you're muted. I don't want to go over if it's
Fine.
okay. Sure. So I think descriptively, I agree with you on sort of what we've both highlighted. I think at least I've hopefully highlighted I guess what I would call a perverse incentive, and I think that the onus should be much more higher on the employer, rather than relying, I guess, on the whim of the customer at the end of the day. That would be my
And
preference, but yeah.
And again, I agree with that, but that doesn't really have much to do with tipping culture. That has to do with how restaurants are paying their employees.
All right. Now, our final championship round, if you guys are keeping track at home, is of course two dudes who sword fight all the time, Vigilante and Lethe Water Kai. I'll start the clock when you start to talk. 10 minutes is on the clock. Go ahead and get after it, gents.
Vigi, I gotta ask, who is this they that you're talking about that is critiquing people's tipping, and why should we care what they're saying?
Yeah, I mean, we can literally just search tip on social media and see hundreds of posts of people fucking bitching that they didn't get tipped, whether it's a server, whether it's a DoorDash driver. It happens all the time.
And you mean to tell me that these people weren't feeling that way, but now all of a sudden, because we have social media, now we see what was on their mind? There's a bunch of dumb opinions out there. You know what they say about
No, they were absolutely feeling
opinions?
that way. That's part of the problem is the societal expectation to tip that is caused by the tipping culture that we have, where people aren't paid properly in order to actually be able to live off of the income that they make.
And how many of these people are not providing a service worthy of tipping?
There's no way to measure that, unfortunately. You can say that it's
Exactly.
all of them, or we could say that it's none of them. It's kind of an opinion thing.
I'm pretty sure the woman that ended up opening the door on the guy that wasn't wearing pants when the delivery dropped was probably pissed off that she didn't get a tip.
Yeah,
Like
probably.
literally, most of these people that are complaining in this way probably never deserved a tip to begin with, because the people that are doing a good service are more than likely being tipped and getting basically given fair wages or fair money for what they're doing.
Yeah, but that's subjective, right? So we can actually look at the statistics. So let's take New York, right? They did the thing with gig workers where they set the minimum wage or like the base pay legislatively of gig workers to $15 an hour, right? Do you think this increased or decreased their wages?
Probably decreased.
Wrong. It actually increased their wages $5. We have studies on this. Their average wage before that was about $11 an hour. And then after that, it is $19 an hour now. So adding an increased base wage plus tips actually increases the amount of money people make.
So I'm not going to argue that people shouldn't get higher base wages. I still say that people tipping is something that is good for incentivizing good service. There's no reason to resist giving people tips for doing something good. And like, I got to ask,
Yeah,
how
well,
many of these people
our
do you
mechanism
think?
of resistance. Well, hold on, we're not the mechanism of resistance that we're talking about here that we're specifically using isn't just don't be. It's not be a dick and not tip people. It's advocate for legislation, specifically legislation that is uh, adding a livable base wage on top, and then you get tips on top of that. That's the mechanism of resistance we're going for here.
How is that resistance in any way? Like literally everybody should be paid more. Like I'm not going to disagree with you with the idea that wages have not kept up with cost of living. This is about tipping and the culture of tipping. This is completely separate from what you're talking about. And so like for the
No,
people that
so
aren't receiving tips
advocating.
and
Hold on,
complaining,
you asked a question, or
Mhm.
hold on. So advocating for legislation is resistance, correct?
Sorry, one more time.
Advocating for legislation is a form of resistance, correct?
No, it's not.
So was advocating for the Civil Rights Act not a form of resistance?
I don't see where it is in regards to tipping.
No, you just said that advocating for legislation is not a form of resistance. So was advocating for the Civil Rights Act not a form of resisting the Jim Crow laws?
No, literally the protesting and everything else was the resistance itself, but advocating just for
Yes,
legislation for
the
civil rights
protesting was
is not in itself
the
resistance.
advocacy. The protesting was the advocacy. We have advocacy groups for uh, setting the base wage to a livable wage, like the One Fair Wage group. We have groups that are going out and doing these things and putting these things on the ballot. That is active advocacy. That is a form of resistance.
No, see, the resistance is the protesting. The actual legislation or even asking for legislation is not resistance. You're conflating the two. But back to my point.
No,
When you're looking at this situation where people don't feel like they're getting the tips they should receive, are those people maybe not built for the service industry or to be doing what they're doing?
not necessarily, because whether or not you're getting tips is it's a subjective thing. Whether or not you're actually doing a good job is subjective to the person doing it, and it's not necessarily whether or not you get tipped isn't necessarily a representation of whether or not you're doing a good job because of the social pressures to tip regardless.
So just because there's social pressures, all of a sudden it's a cultural thing? Like this isn't really the case. Like maybe the case may be
That's
that
what we're talking about when
people
we talk
aren't
about tipping
getting.
culture. Is the societal pressures to tip regardless of whether or not you're getting good service. Tipping is not a bad thing. Having the ability to tip or uh, that we should tip is not a bad thing. The fact is the societal pressures that come with the tipping culture that we have, where people aren't paid enough of a wage in order to actually survive, creates the culture where people are shamed for not tipping, and that is the problem.
This is wild. So like if you go to 7-Eleven and there's a guy outside asking you for, whatever spare change you have, is this all of a sudden a massive social pressure?
No, he didn't. I mean, there's no social pressure to help the homeless. We actually typically advocate the societal thing right now, unfortunately, is to just throw the homeless in jail.
So like that's exactly what I'm saying. You are not in any way being pressured to do something in the sense that there's actually a consequence for you doing it or not doing it. We all receive the benefit, like if you give some money to the homeless guy, or if you tip your server well, you're incentivizing one thing or another. In no way is this like a pressure that you have to succumb to. We
Yeah,
have personal
there's a
agency.
massive difference here, right? There's no societal pressure to help the homeless. There's a societal pressure to tip people because if you don't, you're going to get flamed on social media for it.
Oh no, I'm going to get flamed on social media. Why should I care? Are they feeding me? Are they bringing my food to my table? Like, why do I care about their opinions? They're like assholes. Everybody has one.
I'm just I'm just like you. I don't give a fuck whether I don't give a fuck about other people's opinions, but a lot of people fucking do. That's the reason why we have the societal pressure around tipping.
I don't feel that from a lot of people. They may feel that way, but all the same, none of this has changed. The tipping culture has always been the same, and you tend to want to tip people that do good work, or at least adequate work. If they're doing poor work, they need to change their business.
That's not the reason why the majority of people tip. It's because we feel bad for them because they're not actually getting paid a decent wage.
I've never tipped anyone feeling bad for them because they don't have a living wage. I tip people because they're good workers. I tip the guy that when I go to the curry place, because he's the only guy in the back and he's a small shop owner. Of course, I want to tip the dude. I feel like he's doing something great and I want his business to survive. I don't think this
Yeah, I
is
mean,
a bad thing, and I
what was
think
the
it should be. Go ahead.
what was the statistics that the person that Ghosty brought up on your side that people tip more whenever they don't feel like people are getting a proper wage? That is evidence to what I'm saying. When we talk about the people not getting paid decent enough makes people feel like they have to tip more. That shows that the tipping culture, it pushes people to feel like they have to tip more in order to supplement people's wages.
Bro, that's just being human. Like, if you see another human struggling and know that you want to help them, but also they did something good, yeah, that's why you're going to tip them more. If you know that they don't have a living wage and they're not making much money and they give you bad service, what are you going to do?
I'm going to tip them a lesser amount. I'm still going to tip them probably
You're
like
still most people
10 to
won't tip
15%.
most people won't tip them. So you're one of the good ones in that instance, but most people just wouldn't tip if they get bad service. Like if you got a French fry and you're chili, if they don't replace things, if they don't bring you things, if they messed up your haircut, you're more than likely not going to tip them. If you do, are you going to go back later?
Probably not going to go back later, but I'm still going to tip them.
So that tip means virtually nothing. Like literally, if they're doing bad service, you're not going to go back and you're probably going to tip them less. It doesn't matter what their station is in life.
Yeah, the whole problem is the fact that tipping isn't a sign of whether or not you're actually doing good service. It's supplementing somebody's wage.
Don't necessarily agree with that. Like I said, all the same, like what has been said before, like if they don't make enough in
Yeah, I mean, the
tips,
statistics
they're
that were brought
going
up
to
on your
get
side prove you
base.
wrong, though.
They're going to get the base wage either way.
Yeah, they're going to get the base wage either way, but also if you make more than that wage, just so you know, you actually make less. So that's one of the reasons why it's actually incentivized uh in when are actually a server. It's typically taught to you as a server to not report all of your tips because you actually get paid less from your employer if you report all of your tips.
Basically shirking the system and trying to get the minimum wage and get the tips, which, like I said, I don't have a problem with them making more
Yeah, it's
money,
because of the
but all
fact
the
that we
same,
don't actually. It's because of the fact of the way that the server wages are set up. You don't actually get paid a decent wage. It's not the wage plus the tips. It's the little bit of wage that you have plus tips, and then if you make enough that you're getting minimum wage, and then maybe even more on top of those tips, you just don't get fucking paid.
or maybe people just like more money.
Or maybe people just like more money. All right. That seems like the perfect place to land the plane. All right. Great job, everybody. That is the end of the championship rounds. We've heard everybody go after everybody. So now we're going to go ahead and go through the closing arguments. One more time, chat. If you guys have any questions, anything that you think didn't get addressed, throw a couple bucks in the tip jar. Leafy's already got an answer for his turtle comments earlier, but we'll get to that after the closings. So we're going to go back through in the same order that everybody went already, which means that our first closing is also our first opening. Groofus, 3 minutes is going to be on the clock. Uninterrupted closing, sir. Let us hear your last thoughts.
I'd like to end where I started. What I care about tonight is flourishing, whether people can actually trust the things are presented as they are. Our opponents told us tonight that the current system is fair to workers and that it should remain exactly as is. I think that's actually the most useful thing anyone said tonight because it's a real position and it's clearly stated and it's worth taking seriously enough to test. So one of these sources I mentioned earlier is a meta-analysis of restaurant tipping research, Lynn McCall, that found service quality explains about only 1 to 2% of the variation in what people actually tip, with bill size attractiveness and customers' mood all predicting it more strongly. A separate study on server earnings found much the same thing. Attractive servers earn more, but the effect didn't hold up even for lunch shifts, only evenings. If that's what we're calling fair, I think the word has stopped meaning what we usually mean it. Tipping survives by manipulation, not because anyone designed it that way, but because it depends on people responding to the expectations nobody's willing to admit out loud. The customer is told that they're giving a gift when really they're paying a guilt tax. The worker is told they're being rewarded for merit when they're absorbing whatever the wealthier the section or the stranger's mood happens to have produced that night. Two people at the same table being told a story, and the story is false to both of them. No one has to be a villain for any of this to be true either. A manipulation doesn't need to have a mastermind to be one. It just needs people at both ends who've stopped noticing, and a defense of the system as it stands needs the rest of us to keep noticing too. I don't think a flourishing society can afford that. And also, I brought up turtles on the beach earlier for a reason. You're not going to get all of them back in the water. You may not even make a dent, but you still throw the ones you've in front of you back in because it's the right thing to do whether or not anyone's counting. Consider this my turtle. And I have one question I'd like to direct specifically at Lethe. Why did you do that to those poor turtles? First Gorp with the Easter Bunny, and now you? For shame. For shame.
All right. So, so funny enough, that's the same question that the chat asked as well. So you're going to get the chance to address that here. 3 minutes is going on the clock. Lethe, tell us more about the turtles.
Rufus also moved himself to the waiting room.
I believe a rising tide raises all turtles, and being able to compensate those turtles properly for the greatness that they bring into our lives is something we should do. I wouldn't want to drain the well of the turtles because I feel like they're being uppity and they feel like they expect something like Rufus would. This is a horrible, horrible thing to do. But apparently it's on me for caring about the population of the turtles. But in this, I'm going to say that a fair wage is good. I would never argue against a fair wage, but you should also incentivize above and beyond service and even adequate service. For the individuals that were not built for this industry, maybe they won't get good tips and maybe they'll leave that service. Perfectly fine to me. But all the same, we're looking at a situation where people are able to get jobs, where they're able to make money, not go to college, not have trade, but actually get their natural abilities and their natural charisma rewarded by the people that are happy to receive the service that they're getting. I don't see where this should be disincentivized, and I don't think it should be resisted. All the same, we should still be advocating for higher minimum wages and something closer to whatever the wage gap has been in regards to cost of living. These are completely separate issues. Even if we had a cost of living increase that was manageable for anybody with a job to be able to pay for their rent, pay for their goods, I think they should still get reasonable tips. And the magical, invisible people out there complaining that they didn't get tips online, it's really not an issue. Like, why should we care what their opinion is? If you feel that you tipped for good service or didn't tip for bad service, that's on us. And we have the personal agency to vote with our tips on whether or not a business is doing well or doing poorly. I think we should reward businesses that are doing good things. And I think we should help. And if we see that that business is struggling and we want it to be around, we should tip more when we go there. And if we think a business is bad, give them a bad review. Don't tip when you go there, or leave the minimal tip. It's up to you. But we should advocate for our own agency in this and don't feel shamed or any social pressure when it comes down to it. This is a thing that we do because we want to show our appreciation for what is done. There are great service workers out there, and they should receive for that. And with that, I end my time.
All right. And next up is going to be you, Testicles. 3 minutes is on the clock for your closing, sir. Go ahead and start it up when you're ready.
Sure, I agree with Lethe that that you shouldn't feel pressured or guilty. But the reality of the situation is that we all know what we're talking about. It's almost like this unspoken thing in the room. And even my discussion with Ghosty heavily acknowledged this fact that there is a pressure and an expectation to tip, regardless of service. This is not about going above and beyond. So for our burden, I just kind of want to recenter this. So with the prompt being the tipping culture in America should be resisted. So we're not saying, and I don't think anybody would say this, that we said that tipping is a bad thing or that it should be abolished or anything of that nature. So we're talking about the culture, which I admit is a little bit more amorphous, but in the nicest terms possible, sort of what the negative is defending the status quo is that, again, we've acknowledged that it's not extra money for great service. They're defending a culture where tipping is expected, where the employers can shirk their own responsibility, where the customers are feel pressured to provide a subsidized wage for the workers, and where the workers have to perform pretending to be friendly or patient or just an act of deference in order to just be able to make a decent income. That's at the heart of tipping culture, and that's exactly what the problem is. So the healthy system would just be straightforward. The employer pays the worker, the customer pays the business, and if somebody wants to leave a little bit of extra money because they genuinely appreciate the service, that's perfectly fine. Nobody's arguing about that. Excuse me. And we're not arguing against kindness. I think that you should support each other when you're able to. And we also understand that this is unique in a lot of industries. We've discussed that this doesn't apply to all service industries. You don't tip when you go and get your car changed or your tire changed on your car. Arguably, that's more important. You may need that to get to your job in the first place. So once something is expected, and once people are judged for not doing it, and once the workers rely on it to make their wages whole, we shouldn't pretend it's just a harmless personal choice. At that point, tipping is no longer just a bonus, it becomes part of the wage structure and part of the pressure of the transaction. It also creates the wrong relationship between people. The customer becomes a temporary judge of the worker's income, and the worker becomes dependent on the customer's whim, their mood, their bias, their sense of obligation. And the employer gets to just stand in the background while everyone else gets to deal with the guilt and the awkwardness and the pressure. That's why it should be resisted. Tipping culture shifts the responsibility away from the employers and puts unfair pressure on customers and makes workers' dignity depend too much on pleasing strangers. A modern economy should not make people smile just so that they can pay their rent. Thank you.
All right. And nope, sorry. Wrong one. Next up is going to be Loodle. Loodle Miss, your turn for uninterrupted closing. 3 minutes is on the clock. I'll start it up when you start to talk, sir.
So I just want all the intelligent, free-thinking individuals to realize how much of that rebuttal of that closing argument was just fabricated out of thin air. In debate, you don't get to put up new arguments in the 2AC in the closing argument. So that was all brand freaking new. We didn't have a chance to cross them on it. So let's just like the last half of that, throw it out. But let's go to the real deal here, okay? The issue between relations with employees and their workers was made in 1936 by the FSA, right? It was changed in 1996 and 2012. So this is not an employer-based thing. This is a federally governmentally mandated issue. Okay, so it's not about. So it's like, oh well, it helps the employers get off the. No, it doesn't. As my partner very wisely said, no, the federal law mandates that everybody gets a living wage. If you want to argue about what the living wage is between San Francisco, Florida, Philadelphia, that's a state issue, and you admitted that so much in your argumentation. The whole point is that you can't say tipping culture is bad because people paid $30 an hour in Florida and $15 an hour in Nevada. That's not the point. The point is, whenever it's initiated, whatever the minimum wage is, tips are above and beyond that. And so let's go to the point. It was finally brought up in the closing argument. Surprisingly enough, it should have been brought up in the opening argument, but as I was able to get it on cross-examination, right? The whole point here is tipping culture is the culture in which you as the agent, you as the consumer, can tip a person who's providing you a service based upon your ability and your financial capacity to tip them based upon the service provided them. If you don't tip them well, it incentivizes the service to improve. If you tip them well, it signifies they did that. There's no employer mandate on that. In fact, if you have a crappy employer who's working their way up, or employee rather, who's working their way up, and they can't do well enough to make minimum wage, then the law of the United States makes the employer compensate them to make them up to minimum wage. All these arguments about, well, a barista, a bartender, a cook can make way more. No, they don't make way more than the server does. They are all, the server has the potential to make more than they do if they're an excellent server. The federal law mandates that the employer compensate them to the same level if there's any gap left in tips. This whole like two-tier economy, it's just has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Again, the fundamental point here is that tip culture in America, the topic we're debating, is that tips are meant to incentivize those who provide above and beyond service, and meant to disincentivize by their withholding those who don't. In America, which is the focus of this prompt, we have a free market economy to some extent, which means that the individual consumers, free from guilt, free from shaming, free from devices, get to tip how they want to. The last thing I want to say real quickly is just to dismantle the argument that was made by my opponent in the previous speech. The idea that somehow the American customer is going to know exactly what wage their server is being paid and feel guilted into tipping that to compensate them, but somehow doesn't know how to hit no tip or custom tip, 1%, 2%, $3 is insane. So they want you to hold in your mind these two impossible contradictions, that both the American worker knows exactly how much their server is paid and is going to be guilted into compensating them toward the state minimum wages. That's the one hand. And the other hand, if they're faced with a device that says compensate 15%, they're so overwhelmed, they don't know what to do. They say, yes, massa, I'm going to hit it. It's just ludicrous on the start point. I yield my time.
All right. So next up is you, Vigilante. 3 minutes is going on the clock for you, sir. Start up when you're ready.
Look, the fact is people deserve to get paid properly by their employer. Our opponents brought statistics that show that people tip more often when they feel they have to supplement people's wages. It quantifiably shows that there's guilt involved because people don't get paid properly. This is a fact that we can back up with statistics. The thing is, when we talk about tipping, the way that tipping should work is exactly what Loodle said earlier during mine and his conversation. It should work where people are tipping because they feel like they got great service. That is how it in reality ought to work. But that's not how it in reality it does work, because in reality people tip more when they feel like the person that is servicing them doesn't get paid enough. However, what this does not show, hold on. Yeah, so I brought up the New York bill, right, where they passed the base wage for gig workers. This bill significantly improved the amount of money that gig workers make on average. This proves the idea that bringing people's wages up to a base wage plus tips would decrease their overall wages. It shows that it in fact does actually increase their wages. Just like when me and Ghosty were talking. We were talking about the bartenders, right? The reason why bartenders statistically are more successful is because the money that they make on average before their tips is around $16 an hour throughout the country. The more wages people make on their base wage improves the amount of money that they make. Also, resistance, right? So resist is defined as to exert oneself as to counteract or defeat. Advocating for the legislation, like what we are talking about, is definitionally a mechanism of resistance. We have groups like the one that I mentioned, One Fair Wage. They are currently going around in multiple states, Colorado, Arizona, California, Illinois, Maryland, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, advocating for getting rid of the two-tiered wage system that we currently have, where servers and service workers are paid less from a base pay. They're advocating for service workers to get the minimum wage as a base wage and then tips on top of that. This will improve, as we have seen with the New York legislation for gig workers, it will improve and make people earn more money, and that should be the goal. It also will change the culture to where tipping is more focused again on whether or not somebody is providing you good service. It is currently not that, and it should be that.
All right. And last but not least, Ghosty. 3 minutes is on the clock for your closing, ma'am. Go ahead and start it up when you're ready.
Okay. So, tipping culture does not exploit workers. As Ludo mentioned, and I can't believe I forgot to mention throughout this debate, there is federal law which requires businesses to pay their workers minimum wage if the tips they make do not surpass it. So, tipping culture provides workers to make a career from their skills and allows workers to actually work less hours and make more money than they would at a minimum wage or most flat wage jobs, especially if you don't have a degree. Vigi mentioned bartenders. They don't make a living because they get paid on average $16 an hour. They make a living from tipping culture, again, allowing them to work less hours and make more money. Again, those complaining about tipping are always the tippers. Most people would rather work a tip job than a minimum wage job. And why is that? Because they make more money. Tipping is also not extremely pressured. Pew Research found that around 2 in 10 Americans, so 21%, say it's more of a choice, while 29% say it's more of an obligation. The largest share say it depends on the situation, underscoring the lack of single set or rules or expectations. So, yeah, most people don't actually feel obligated to tip, and they feel it's more situational based. Also, how would people on social media even know if you tipped or not in order to shame you, unless you shared it yourself? Ultimately, I hope some folks out there consider tipping horseradish tonight for putting this debate and panel together. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, a little bit of gratuitous grift tipping request is great.
Gratuity?
Yeah, gratuitous gratuity would be wonderful. All right, everybody. So that was it. That is all of the closings. That is all of the debate. I'm now going to drop a link into the chat. I'm also going to send it to Ghosty. You are streaming, I assume, over on YouTube. Loodle, are you live on YouTube?
I'm live on YouTube. Yes,
all right,
sir.
fantastic. Then I will message both of y'all the link so you can put it into your own chat. But if you guys have questions, feel free to shoot those at me.
Wish they could be like the cool kids. Me and Ghosty are the cool kids. They don't seem to fit in. Sorry.
No, YouTube isn't as cool because you can't do the stream together, actually. So
I know it. So.
That's the difference. There you go.
Kid.
Yep, you guys are left out of the Twitch stream together. So when I drop it into the chat, anybody who is streaming with us on Twitch gets it automatically in their chat. But I have to go over to YouTube myself and drop it into my chat. For the no viewers who are hanging out over there and over in Kick for the other no viewers. There you go. But that's all right. That's why we do this on Twitch. So, all right, you guys, I'm going to put 10 minutes on the clock. That's how long you guys have to vote. And hopefully you guys throw some questions in again. Lethe, you already addressed where the, what was it? Where on the doll the turtle touched you. I think that you you already addressed that one.
I had a troll comment actually.
Okay. A troll comment?
No, turtle.
Oh, you had the turtle comment. I don't know. Well, no, the chat asked Lethe.
No.
So.
I did. I know. I'm saying I also have a turtle comment. I see.
Okay, well, hold on. It looks like Salty actually did throw some money in the jar. He does have a question. This is a question for the AF. Would one of you please expand on how the act of resisting the expectation of tipping is not equivalent to an outright refusal to tip, and how said resistance may then put the onus of payment onto the employer where it rightfully sits? I'm going to read that for you guys one more time.
I feel like I kind of answered this with my closing, right?
Okay, do it again.
The word resist is defined as to exert oneself as to counteract or defeat, advocating for legislation to defeat the tipping culture where the servers and stuff are paid less than a lesser minimum wage, right? Where not only are they paid a lesser minimum wage, where if you report all of your tips and you make more than minimum wage with all of those tips, you actually get less from your employer because that's part of the way that the law works. It's not a base flat wage. It's based off of how much tips you get. Advocating to get rid of that gets rid of the tipping culture where it feels like it's mandated to supplement people's wages.
Anybody else on the AF want to add anything to that?
Sorry, somebody's cutting wood outside my house. Hopefully, you can't hear that.
Nope. Can't
I
hear it.
broadly agree. I broadly agree with. No, I agree with what Vigi said. I do think that when we're talking about a cultural change, you know, I've already acknowledged it's a little bit more, I guess, amorphous, but I think that one of the things to highlight as well is the expansion into other industries. So, yeah, sorry, maybe I don't have anything to say.
Rufus?
Never mind. I got thrown off by this thing outside my house. One sec.
No, I pretty much agree with Vigi there on
All right.
just
Cool.
on the definitional part.
Sounds good. Hopefully that was a good enough answer for you there.
Can I
Salty.
say something? I have a deep problem with that answer.
Sure. Go ahead. I would hope so.
Right, so the whole thing. Oh yeah, I mean exactly right. The whole thing is that the proprietary definition that was made up by Chief Ball Handler over there and forwarded by Vigi and McGruffus is that resistance requires some sort of legislative authority or legislative opposition. No, it doesn't. The civil rights movement was began by resistance from black churches and white communities who forwarded non-segregation. So I'm saying, no. You put into your definition, it requires legislative opposition that somebody has proposed.
No, I'm saying the type of I'm saying legislation qualifies as resistance. I gave the dictionary definition. It's the Merriam-Webster definition of the word resist. You can look it up yourself. It is a dictionary definition.
Why do you stick in legislation then? Why do you stick in legislation?
Because the mechanism of
let him answer.
Sorry.
The mechanism of resistance that we are choosing to go with is pushing for and advocating for legislation. That is a mechanism of resistance, definitionally.
I'm so glad you chose that over suicide bombing. Good for you. The other point is that the actual definition of resistance does not include or mention legislation. You add that in post hoc. You know you did.
All right. So
no shit, because it's the mechanism of resistance that we're choosing, dumbass.
Oh,
say what?
We're throwing names around now.
Fighting words.
Yeah, fighting words.
They'll be fighting words.
First insult came from the AF. All right, so I have another question here while we
I'll
wait.
read you the definition again.
Y'all have already debated. Y'all have already debated. We're going through the questions and answers. Y'all could have gotten through all of this in your cross examinations. It's okay. We will get into this more in the after party. Don't worry. But we're done with the debating at this point. We're just doing Q&A. So I want to go around to everybody in the room on both sides of the fence because there are a couple of points I have questions, but there's one that I want to ask everybody. I'm going to set up a story. I will go order my own, let's say, sushi at the restaurant. I go pick it up myself, drive it back to my house. Okay. So I don't have a wait staff. I don't have a delivery person. But when I get there, I swipe my card and it asks me, do I want to tip? Do you tip and how much? You first, Testing.
The question is,
everybody's getting it. Everybody's getting it. You first, Testing. Do you tip and how much?
So if I understand, you've called in, you've ordered.
You called in the order. That's right. You were literally picking it up from them. You were literally just tipping them for handing you your food.
I will generally tip. Yeah.
How much?
About 10%. About 10%. I would say.
10%.
Lower amount than the standard. Like I would if I was sitting down, but yeah, usually 10%.
All right. Wow. Lethe, same story. You walked in, you called in the order, you're grabbing some falafel, they turn the thing around to you, and it says, do you want to tip? You've picked it up, you've done everything, do you tip and how much?
If I respect the place that I'm going to and I know I'm getting good service, of course I'm going to tip, even if I'm picking it up and I'm not getting somebody bringing me water or anything like that. And I usually tend to tip 15% or more depending on the situation, but also depending on how much I spend at the place. So I may give more if I know I'm putting more on the wait staff and more on the chefs to make my order. And if it comes out quickly and it comes out good, yeah, I may tip more. So it's definitely a good thing.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to actually change the question slightly now. Vigilante, I would like it. Let's say you ordered Domino's pizza and you pull up and you walk in and you buy your carry out pizza. Do you tip for carry out pizza? If so, how much?
Generally speaking, not for like carry out pizza, no. Just because they're generally actually paid a livable wage. If they were paid the same way that servers were, I would.
All right. Ghosty, you call in an order of pizza, you go pick it up yourself. Do you tip them? And if so, how much?
So for me, in most cases, I don't, unless it's my local pizza place that I literally walk to. It's a block away, and I actually like have built a relationship with the workers in there. And I typically give like $5, maybe a couple
Okay.
bucks.
All right. Rufus, do you tip at Domino's if you're carrying out? If so, how much?
No, I don't. I don't like Vijay. I don't tip for walk in walk out. If it's a sit, I only tip for sit down.
Okay. And Loodle, do you tip at your carry out pizza place? If so, how much?
It's such a funny thing that people can just say like, "Oh, we tip this much or that much based upon the carryout." It's almost like it's up to the customer's agency if they want to tip based upon any criteria that they decide. So I will tip upon the criteria. If there's before I was a married man, if there was a super cute girl, I might tip for substitute reasons. The point being is that it's up to the individual agency. The point in time where you're taking up that there's some mandatory tip thing, all of our opponents have just admitted they wouldn't tip because they're doing the work. That is tipping culture. If you do good service, you get good tips. If you've accomplished half the service yourself,
this is argumentation.
Yeah, that was what I said. It seems like this seems like argumentation. I was just going to say the same thing. No, it's all right. So, what was your answer? Yes or no? Do you tip?
Lawyers going lawyer.
Right, lawyers going lawyer.
Yeah, lawyer going lawyer.
Do you tip when you carry out pizza? Yes. Depending.
$2.50.
All right.
$2.50.
Sounds like a social obligation.
All right. Sounds
like a Loch Ness monster.
Let me show you my social obligation.
Okay. Wow. Just like that. All right. So yes, I did actually ask that question for that reason. I apologize, but I'm guilty of swaying the audience or giving you the opportunity to. So another question. You guys were talking, and I don't remember who it was that asked this or who brought it up, and I'm not sure if it got said, but in most places, I've worked in several bars, some with restaurants, the bar staff does not make any more. Like if you're in a state where the wait staff is getting tipped or is getting paid service industry wages, right? I think in Texas it was like $2.15 an hour. If you're in a place where they are getting paid that, so is anybody else who works for tips. So the bartenders are making it the same. But generally what happened in the bars that I worked at is the bartenders who made a shit ton more money would tip out the kitchen, would tip out the security guards, would tip out sometimes depending on who made the most money, the waitresses would tip out the bar and then the bar would tip the tip system goes to everybody. So even the guy in the kitchen is making some money. I also heard somebody say though, that if the server, like the server being bad at being a server will punish the kitchen unfairly. But the same thing, my question now, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to bump around to each of y'all just for a real quick question. You have great service, but the food is ass and it did not come out the way you ordered it. I say it's great service. You don't know if she put in the order wrong or if he just didn't hear you or if your waiter or waitress is different. If they suck, you don't know, but they were nice to you every time. Your drink was full and they kept coming back and apologizing, but your food was fucked from day one. Are you going to tip? Are you going to hold that against the wait staff? You first, Testy. Yes or no?
Generally speaking, if the food is essentially inedible, like they really, screwed the pooch on it, that would affect my tip. I would still tip, but it would probably be a lower tip, even though I am acknowledging that it is not at the feet of the server.
Okay.
It's
Same.
a cohesive experience, right?
Yep. Same question to you, Lethe. Service seemed like it was great. The wait staff was all nice, but the order was wrong. The food was bad, undercooked. Do you tip? Do you tip as much?
So usually in this instance, and it's happened pretty often, I'll slide something special to the server themselves because I
That's
know it's
money.
not their fault and they shouldn't be punished for that. But it should also disincentivize them keeping the bad cooks, the bad actors that made the service bad. So it wasn't on this server. You should incentivize that server getting what they deserve, but also disincentivize them keeping the individuals that ruined your service.
All right, fair. And Vigi, food's ass, service is great. Does it affect your tip then?
No, not really. It's still partially based off of how much money I have available and how good of service the person actually did on whether or not they're getting actual extra money more than what I normally would do. Because my default is like 15%. I do 15% across the board, whether or not whether or not I get good service, and then more based off of that.
All right. Ghosty, service is great. Food isn't. You still tipping the same?
Yeah, at a sit-down restaurant, I typically tip 20% no matter what. It has to be a really extreme situation for me to tip less, or I might tip more if I like really thought they went above and beyond, or the server was like super friendly or something like that. But like people have bad days, so I typically tip 20% no matter what.
All right. Rufus, food's shit, but service is great. Does it change your tip?
No, not really. I'm gonna end up tipping roughly the same amount regardless.
Okay.
There's also something else I could say, but it's argumentative.
I appreciate you holding it back. And last but not least, Loodle. Is the food is not what you ordered, but the service was with a smile. Is it going to affect your tip?
Can I ask you what year we're in?
Now.
All right, cool. But under the current laws, then yeah, I would tip the server. So I would say, if the food is crap, that's not under the FSA in 1996, right? That's on them. So the server is making less money. So I would tip the server as according to their service.
All
If
right.
the server was great, the cook was shit, I'd give the server 25, 30%.
All right. All right. Cheers. All right. So it looks like we did have one more question come in from the chat, and then we're going to go ahead and go to the votes. It looks like Parallax asked Lethe, do you only sign up for debates against opponents you know you can't lose to?
Jesus.
I take offense to that.
Yeah, probably.
All right, there you go. I hope Team AF appreciates that. All right, so you guys have had the chance. I'm going to lock this in one more time. Boom. So you guys can, if you're last minute or pulling up late, decide who you think made the most persuasive case, not just who you like the most or who you agree with, but who you think had the most cohesive arguments, had the most, seemed the most prepared, were the most persuasive in general. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and give me those results. Really? Nobody's voting? Y'all just don't
I
want
didn't
to
vote yet. Hang on 1 second.
No, it's too late. I already clicked it. Y'all took too long. And it is locked in.
That's called a joke.
Yeah, no, I understand. And well, the joke is that you guys won. Looks like the votes were for the negative, 54% to 45%. So
almost like 6-7%.
There you go.
Bruh.
We're going to call it a 6-4 victory for the negative team. Apparently, the viewing audience does not believe that the tipping culture in America should be resisted. So,
unfortunately, the viewing audience is intelligent.
I know people don't deserve to get paid a livable wage.
Yeah, there you go.
That was never implied.
Exactly.
Why would you think that?
I know.
All right, so
After party.
real quick, yep, I was about to say we're gonna get all the way into this. I'm gonna put probably 2 hours on the clock here, and we're gonna go ahead.
Deep.
Yeah, we're gonna go late. But we got
Oh,
through
let's go.
we got through the debates pretty quick, so that's pretty cool. If there's anybody who is part of the server or part of the DMZ who wants to jump in here, I will take guests in here for a couple minutes at a time if you guys wanted to weigh in or say anything to them. But I do have my own questions and my own pushback, and we're gonna get into it all, and we're gonna see if we can find the bottom of the barrel. But with that, I got to say my goodbye. So thank you again to all of tonight's debaters. Above all, thank you to all of the viewers. We would not be here without you. The DMZ happens live on Twitch, YouTube, and Kick every Friday and Saturday night. So please make sure to give us a follow, a like, and a subscribe so you can get the notifications every time we go live. If you haven't already, join the free Discord server where we take the conversations after the lights go off and the cameras go away. That is where you can tell me if you are interested in participating in these debates. I am the Horseradish, and I hope to see you guys here for the next round in the DMZ. Thank you again to all of tonight's debaters, and above all, thank you to all of the viewers. We wouldn't be here without you. The DMZ happens live on Twitch, YouTube, and Kick every Friday and Saturday night, so make sure and follow, like, and subscribe so you will get notifications when we go live. And if you haven't already, join the free Discord server where we take the conversations after the lights go off and the cameras go away. That is where you can tell me if you are interested in participating in the debates. I am the Horseradish, and we hope to see you guys for the next round here in the DMZ.